tap your own mother out?
Terrible.
Especially against your
No! Last round I smoked this round. No! Might have smoked. Oh no, that's not good. No,
side shot.
Paper! No, not the paper.
On ball.
Anything but paper.
There you go. That's right.
That's you. Alright, fine.
Yeah.
We'll do tiebreaker after I get out. Wait, what do you Wait. Are you coming back?
Or I go to
You first what? No. Yeah. I know.
Yes. No, what do you mean?
No. Yeah. Oh wait, having fun.
Oh, that's a ball.
Oh, watch the street. Oh. Oh no! What happened? Why did I grab it?
I'm the best.
I was at the edge.
I win.
Okay, so
Oh, one game one. I like that. Oh no. No. He won the Super Smash Bros.
do you want to run?
And he got a $200.
I mean,
The signature game you can't let it stop on your turn. And you can't hit it from the side. You have to be and if it goes, if you hit it in one of the pockets, the person actually gets if the right side hits it,
oh yeah, yeah.
That was a side shot. No, I was past.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well,
That
that's
is
not.
not work. So bad.
You did start that.
I didn't start that. She started that right before I came in. So. Yeah, the one. Yeah. Oh my gosh. No. Yeah, well,
Dang it.
no, no.
I'm get some more.
Yeah,
Get back here, Mr. Martin.
This one? Oh, that was genius. Ouch. Yes. It's cute. Did it stop? No, that's stop.
Wait, so it's nothing? See you.
Oh no!
I mean,
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I know it counts. Second, there you go. So see, you forgot the
Wait. No. Wait, what?
last call for donuts and we're finding our seats and starting up.
All right. So 7-0.
Let's just do another round. Is it Bowser?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just take this.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Do you want it? Have it. I was gonna eat it because it's like my favorite.
Oh, yeah!
This is my second.
Wait, no.
No, my hand touched the ball. My hand touched the ball. Whoa!
That's the one still there.
No.
It was
Daniel?
Yes, sir.
Some glass just broke.
What broke?
This little mason jar.
Like, what happened?
The ball like hit slightly and it broke. Yeah.
Sorry, the pool ball
Yeah, it's the pool ball.
slightly hit something?
Yeah, I swear it slightly hit it.
Was it flying off the pool table? Other pieces of it? We'll grab it. That's one. Thank you for letting me know. That's journaling hour.
Oh.
All right, everybody, let's go grab a seat and a Bible.
I don't need a Bible. It's a big joke.
That's just better.
Huh?
That's just better.
Mine should be better.
No, mine are better.
Mine are better.
They're
literally the same.
Well, I don't know. Maybe his are like newer.
Yeah.
No, I think
I don't know. Maybe hers are
no,
newer.
I think mine are newer. I mean, look at
Maybe
his.
Hey, I just haven't cleaned them
Look at his and look at mine.
Maybe hers were actually manufactured in the 80s.
I need my iPod.
Yeah,
I wouldn't ever
Hey,
see.
Sonia
Yeah.
or who else is playing? Jediah, could one of you guys go turn off the
I got
Wii
it.
and the TV? Hey,
If I had my iPod, I would for sure win that game. That bucket thing.
is it made of glue?
Dang.
No,
Oh,
it has rubber on it, and
that
so.
that's probably like
But not my phone, my
half
iPod.
of them. I have to turn mine to silent. I forgot. Alrighty, guys.
I have an iPhone in there. But if I had my iPod, I just yeet it in there.
Just pretend I put it in there.
Alright, guys, open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 5. We're going to be doing chapter 5 and 6 today. We're going to breeze through chapter 5, though. Because, well, you'll see. Just open up to chapter 5, you'll see.
What?
It's hot in here.
Genesis 5. Is it hot?
Yeah.
Okay. I can turn the air up a little.
Turn the air
That's how I talk, okay?
Yes.
If you like how I talk, that's fine. You don't have to. I mean, I'm going to change how I talk. Yep, that's what happens.
Daniel, does it smell like laundry detergent?
I think it does.
It does.
I smell laundry either. I smell chicken nuggets. How do you smell laundry detergent making
All I smell is that.
It's the donuts.
I don't like that.
It doesn't. It doesn't smell like anything.
It smells like chicken nuggets.
It smells like air.
It does smell like air. You're right.
Smells
What
like
an
nose.
excellent observation.
Smells like a ton of nose.
Or if you can smell my scrumptious donut over here.
Okay. Hey Nate, how's it going? Come on in.
Oh, what's up, Nate?
All right, guys. Did you guys find chapter 5 yet? Yes. Okay. Someone want to look at chapter 5 and tell me why we might be going through it quickly?
Because it's in the Bible.
Because it's short.
Ooh, I was
No?
born like a chapter, like
We're
a
skipping
little
most
bit
of
ago.
Why? Explain it to me. I just want you guys to see
there's
it
a
so
bunch
you
of
know.
names on this.
There's a bunch of names. Okay. Anyone want to count how many guys there are in this gigantor list?
No, I don't.
Okay, well I did it for you. I made you a generation list
There's 50.
because I like timelines. That's my jam. Except my clicker's broken. Let's click.
Nate, why not the seat?
Yeah, Nate.
We
Come on,
saved you a
Nate,
seat
Nate.
though, Nate.
Nate, come on.
Nate,
Stay, mate.
come on over
All right,
here.
Alright, so on the screen is 2,000 years of time from the leftist most pixel to the rightist most pixel. And over here on the left we have Adam, who lived for 930 years. And then behind that, Abby, while you're up, could you turn off light switch number 2? Like if you're looking at those 1, 2, 3, 4, turn off number 2. Yes. Now this is a little more visible. Okay. So then you got Cain. He's not in this line. He's just of note, so I stuck him on there. Same with Abel. He's not in this line, but he's of note, so I stuck him on there. These are the number of years they lived, and then you get to Seth, and then it's father, son, 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 son. Does that make sense? All the way down the line. That's basically what chapter 5 tells you. It gets you from Adam down to Japheth, Shem, and Ham, and it gives you how old all these guys were when they had their kids, or at least their eldest son. They could have had older daughters. They could have had many, many, many kids after. But this is the time difference between each of their oldest kids. And these time differences are pretty big. Not just the amount of years they live, but also the amount of time they wait to have kids is pretty big. Adam waited like 50-something years, and Seth waited like over 100 years to have kids. Enos was up around 90. So you can kind of see like this graph goes all over the place, but like Methuselah waited over 180 years to have his first son. Now, maybe he had 50 daughters before that. I don't know what the odds are of that happening. Probably horrible. But he did have to wait till after 180 to get his first son. That's a long time. And so we could surmise that out of all these guys, maybe half of them had a daughter before their son. The other half, this is probably their first kid. That's still really long. I mean, on average, if this was all their first kids, that means they waited on average 108 years to have their first kid. Like I said, though, this could be a 50-50 thing where there's like an unrecorded daughter before the son comes along, so maybe it's closer to like 50. But still, waiting to your 50s to have a kid, that's a long time. That is basically what Adam and Eve did, though. They were around for like 50 years before they had a kid. That's nuts. Okay, so then, let's rewind one step. We have down here, we've got Noah. He waited. I took him off the chart because he would have thrown off the average like a lot. Noah waited like 500 years before he got to his boys. And he had 3 of them. As far as we know, Japheth and Shem are basically twins or born like a year apart. They're darn close. And then Ham came along a bit later. But he was 500 by the time he had his 3 boys. 500. It is so mind-bogglingly different from how we do things now. Nowadays, people start having kids around 20, and they usually are done having kids around 40. Like that's the normal range. There are people outside that range for sure, but that's like the normal range. But what that means is that the generation gap between most families is about 20 years, give or take. There's about 20 years between each father-son, mother-daughter, like distance. And with that, the population goes really slow. It doesn't grow very fast because you're having like 2.5 kids per family, and you have to wait like 20 years. But then you're like done 20 years later. You don't have any more kids after that. Yes.
So if they age to be like super old, did they look super old? Or
The
was
whole
it
time?
just-
I don't think so because it says they had kids a lot longer too. So likely their childbearing age is kind of a percentage how we are now. So if our max age is 120, their max age is like the theoretical 1000, then the percentages aren't that hard to skew in your head. So like if we go from the 20s to the 40s, then you could rough guess they aren't waiting till 200 to have kids. But they probably didn't have to wait till 50, but a lot of them were waiting till 50. So somewhere around the 50-year mark, all the way up into like the 4, 5, and because of Noah, you can at least make it to 500, possibly older, maybe even 600 or 700. But again, we don't know a lot of personal details about these people when they get into those ages. Adam's story drops off as soon as Seth is born. We're done with that. We don't get to hear any more particulars about him. The oldest guy we really get to watch and hear about is Noah. That's the oldest guy we watch and hear about. He built the biggest wooden boat on record after he was 500. So that's like the best personal detail we have as far as like how health was throughout these span of years. If you can build the biggest wooden boat on record after you're 500, you're still looking pretty good after you're 500. You're probably not some old raisin man, you know, hobbling around with your bent back at 500. You're probably looking like the stretched out timeline guy. So you're probably still in your middle age period when you're at 500.
Cool.
That's pretty cool. But then you get to the physiology, and the physiology says that even if you lived 1,000 years, you wouldn't get to puberty, you wouldn't get to adulthood late. You would still get to puberty and adulthood in the same span of time, even if you live 1,000 years, because the hormone releases wouldn't change. So it's interesting how that works. You would basically still be a 20-looking-year-old person when you were 20, even if you could live to 1,000. So that's pretty cool to think about. What that also flips into is your body wouldn't start looking older in the sense of the hunching back and the super wrinkles and the graying hair until you got to the point where your body was wearing out the downward side of your body's hormone spectrum. So you could also look 30s, 40s age for a very, very long time, and the aging you would actually experience is like the scars and the wounds you endure and the injuries you have, and like, oh, I've got a bad hip from that time I fell off the side of a mountain, but I still have 300 years to live. Like, so it would be different. You would still age in some regards, but then not the same as what we're used to. Okay, so all that aside, because we're mostly skipping chapter 5. Basically, what it does is it tells you where Adam is in time, tells you where Noah is in time, tells you how big the overlaps are. So you can see, like Adam, I drew a little line down from his death. He could have actually met Lamech, who is the father of Noah. So like Noah couldn't have met Adam, but Noah's dad could have feasibly known Adam, the first man who ever lived. Even though there's 1,000 years from creation to Noah. Isn't that wild? The first man could have known Noah's dad, even though Noah was born after, like 1,000 years after creation. His dad could have known Noah. It's so weird. Like that doesn't make sense. There could have been millions of people by this point in time. If you follow the population curve that's possible with these age-bearing ages, the population within 1,000 years could have already hit the millions. That's wild. You could have been near, in some estimates, to what we have now, billions. That's insane. But that's what happens when every person can theoretically have kids for hundreds of years and doesn't have to stop unless they want to. They could just have kids. That's a wild difference from now. So who knows what the population is like? But we do know some stuff about the population, and we do know some more things that are on the timeline. This tiny, barely visible single blue pixel line right here is the flood. This tiny, barely visible single blue or red pixel line is the Tower of Babel. This little blue stripe is the Ice Age. And again, some of this stuff, I put these little wiggly symbols here. That's because we're deducing this by math. Those ones we don't have hard numbers on. The Bible doesn't say exactly how long these three guys lived. We're doing it on math. We're just trying to figure out best guess. Same thing with the Ice Age. We don't know the exact date it started. We don't know the exact date it stopped. We don't know how fast it ramped up, how slowly it ramped down. We're just kind of guessing with math. So let's jump in, though, to chapter 6. We're actually going to read chapter 6 right as Caleb leaves. All right, well, you get first spot there. Actually, if you wouldn't mind reading it on the screen, I found an interesting translation to try out today. You guys are welcome to read what's in your Bible, but this is the one I want to read as a group for various reasons. Go for it.
When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they choose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years.
The Nephilim. That's a tricky word.
Born on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown.
Okay, now this section you read for us is actually really heavily fought over. This is something people argue about. And so I just want to give you guys both sides of this, and you can kind of figure out where you lay in the which way this gets translated. You can talk to your parents, see what they think about it. It's a strange little passage. There's a word here that doesn't really get used a bunch. There's another word that doesn't really get used a bunch. It makes it tricky to translate. Early Genesis chapters have that. They have words we don't see ever again or don't see often. So there's a couple here. So first off, we've got the sons of God. Now this phrase, sons of God, happens a bunch in the New Testament, but that's a different language. That's Greek. This is Old Testament, it's Hebrew. And sons of God in Hebrew, this exact phrase, only crops up in Genesis and Job. That's it. These are the two oldest books on the planet. Genesis and Job are the two oldest books on the planet, and the phrase only comes up in those two books. And in Job, every single time this phrase gets brought up, it's an angel. In every instance in Job. And it's only in Genesis this one time. So the original translation usually says the angels, or the fallen angels. Now, why is this fought about? Well, because it says that they married women. They married the daughters of men, and that's a really ordinary phrase that literally just means daughters of humans. That's all it means, completely ordinary. So if this really translates to angels, and this really translates to human women, that's weird. And this gets double weird because you go to the New Testament and they ask a question about when you get to heaven, are you still married? Da, 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 da. What if someone was married twice while they were alive? Or who are they married to in heaven? And Jesus is like, you guys don't get it. In heaven, the angels neither give nor take in marriage. They don't get married, and neither will you guys. There will be no marriages in heaven. So when Jesus says this, he doesn't say, with his wording, angels cannot possibly get married. He says, angels don't. But he also specifically says the angels in heaven. And so people continue the argument, and they go, well, wait a second, if these are fallen angels, then they're not in heaven. And Jesus said angels in heaven. So, loophole. Okay, so it's still weird, right? But let's say it's not that. The other side of the argument says sons of God. Well, this just refers back to chapter 4. If you guys go back and read the last verse in chapter 4, flip over there. Verse 26 in chapter 4. What does it say right at the end, the very last sentence?
These replied to the Lord, no punishment is too many.
Nope. That's not the end of chapter 4. Turn the
Oh
page.
my.
Good try.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it?
He said to the page.
When Seth grew up, he had a son and named him Enoch. At that time, people first began to worship the Lord by name.
Okay, now another translation of that ending, worship the Lord by name, is call upon the name of the Lord. And some people actually read that to mean they called themselves children of God. They named themselves after the Lord. That's one of the possible translations for that verse. And so the idea would be that there was actually at that point in history, right there, so generation 3, Adam, Seth, Enoch. Generation 3 was where there was a split in humanity, and some people decided to keep following God, and some people decided, yeah, don't want to. So some people think that this phrase, the sons of God, is referencing that group, the people who decided to follow God. And that this phrase, the daughters of man, meant, when you pair it with, and they took as their wives any they chose, meant they were marrying willy-nilly and multiple times. So some people think this means angels and normal women. Other people think it means people who followed God, any old woman, no choosiness, no being picky, just whoever looked prettiest. which one you fall out on, I don't think really matters that much in the grand scheme of things. If you think the weirdest thing possible, fallen angels getting married with human women, or you think the semi-normal thing, like, godly men falling prey to pretty women and just marrying whoever looked prettiest, either way, not good. Either way, God didn't approve of what was happening. That's really the important part here. Where it gets a little strange, though, is this phrase, Nephilim and mighty men. Those two phrases really, really lean it back in the camp of weird and might have actually been angels. Because the phrase Nephilim means fallen ones and gets brought up later in the Bible way more than sons of God. Sons of God, like I said, Genesis, Job, that's it. Nephilim gets brought up in the Old Testament multiple times, and it's always in reference to giants like Goliath. And this phrase mighty men is frequently translated giants. The wording in the root literally means man of great stature, as in impressively great stature. So if it's not angels marrying women, if it's just godly men marrying ungodly women, why did they have giant babies? Why did that happen? That doesn't make any sense. Just because you married someone who's ungodly doesn't mean your babies are going to have giantism. That's not logical. So this almost leads us right back into the camp of the strangest possible translation for this verse. Fallen angels marrying human women. In any case, whichever it is, like I said, it doesn't actually affect the story that much. Because the point is, God saw what was happening and he was not pleased. And there's actually worse than this. This is bad, but it actually gets worse. We'll jump back to Cameron. Cameron, can you read us this one?
Okay.
You can just read it on the screen. I picked an odd translation.
The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. For I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Now, Noah just gets blurred here, but that's because he was already mentioned in chapter 5. Like, you leave off chapter 5, getting down to Noah, and then chapter 6 works its way back to Noah, brings him back to the picture. So this phrase up here, though, is really strong. Notice what it says here. Every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Do you see what he did there? That sentence leaves no wiggle room. You can't even have a nice thought if this sentence is true. This sentence says, every intention. So like sometimes someone does something and they're a little bit rude and you're like, oh, he probably had good motives. Probably, he didn't mean to be rude. No, in this case, this point in time, he did. He was trying to be rude. He had no good intentions. None. Every intention was only evil. Continually. There's no exceptions left over for this. Constantly thinking evil all of the time. That's really bad. Now, we live in a fallen world, and there's lots of mean and evil people on this planet. All of us do bad things, even when we're trying not to. We make mistakes. And then there's people who are trying to. But I honestly believe most people aren't trying to be evil all of the time. It's hard to believe that there would ever be a time when people would be always evil all of the time. But you know what the Bible says on top of this verse? Jesus says that at the end of the world, it will go back to being this way. That the end of the world is marked by people being this way, having only evil intentions all of the time.
That's what happened if laws disappeared.
Say that one more time.
I feel like that's what happened if laws disappeared. Also.
If laws disappeared, I don't even think the laws are the point, because like people who break laws either do it accidentally or they do it intentionally, but they still break laws. You don't need laws to make people nice. You need laws to punish people when they're not nice. Like, people are only good because they have some sort of moral code they're trying to follow. They have something they're trying to stick to, something they're trying to keep up with. And with Jesus, we have a perfect model of what is good. Because we try to keep up with that. We try to be like him. Other people have other things they're trying to keep up with. And for some people, it's the law. but the law's there and they're still bad people. So I don't know. I think this is a heart condition. That's really the point of all this. And then God feels regret. He feels grief. And he says that he's sorry that he made all this stuff. And as he's looking through all of the things that are turned to evil, and the earth is suffering under all of these people being evil, he sees one man. That's it. One. And what's interesting about that statement is it doesn't say one man and his family. It says one man. Now his family gets saved, and that's really cool. But it doesn't say his family was good. It doesn't say his family was following God. It says him. Just Noah. That's crazy. All right, Caleb, you're up next.
These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless and perfect. Noah walked with God, and Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, and
Japheth. All right, so a few things to note here. This little phrase, these are the generations of Noah, this pops up in Genesis a couple of times. It's like Moses' original chapter marks. It does it for Adam, it does it for Noah, I think it does it for Abraham, and then it does it for Joseph right at the end. So like, these are the big chapter dividers in Moses' original work, because the chapters were added later. The verses were added later, all the little numbers. Those were not added by Moses. He didn't come up with those. We invented those and stuck them in there so that when I say a verse, you know what the heck verse I'm talking about. Like, you can look it up in your Bible too. Moses didn't put those in. His original breaks were these. These are the generations of Noah. So he just like pauses on the big guys, the ones whose families did a bunch of stuff, where a bunch of stuff happened around them. Then it says he's blameless in his generation. That means his culture didn't change who he was. His culture. This is the worst culture you can possibly imagine. Whatever you think about today's culture, it's nothing like that. It's worse. So much worse. His culture was continually evil all the time. Nothing but selfishness, nothing but cruelty, violence, as we're going to find out in the next verse. Just bad, 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 bad. And yet, somehow, Noah's blameless. And then it also says Noah walked with God, and that's a phrase used of Adam, who literally walked in the Garden of Eden with God. That's a phrase used of Enoch. And I don't know if you guys remember Enoch. Do you remember Enoch? No? No one remembers Enoch? Go back in your Bible. Look at chapter 5. Find Enoch. He's in there. He's in chapter 5, the part we skipped. He's in the timeline, too. Go back in chapter 5. Find Enoch. See, it only says one thing about Enoch. That's it. There's one thing about him. It's not Noah's dad. Noah's dad's Lamech.
Is that verse 21? No.
Read it. Did you find the word Enoch? Yeah. But see what it actually says. Check it out. Because this is all it says. It doesn't say more. Yes. You got it? Read it. Oh, well, who said they got it? Your hand was up and she said something? I guess I thought you said it.
got it.
Oh, okay. Well, you can read it, Sonia.
I
Go
don't
ahead.
have it.
When Enoch was 65 years old, he became the father of Methuselah.
Keep going.
After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch lived in close fellowship with God for another 300 years, and he had another son and daughter, other sons and daughters. Enoch lived 365 years, walking in close fellowship with God. Then one day he disappeared because God took him.
Kidnap.
That's all it says about Enoch. That's the whole thing. But he's stinking
God
famous.
just yoinked him off the earth.
That's it. He got yoinked. And
He got yoinked.
the not dying is incredibly unique. Very few people on this earth ever get to not die. Like permanently not die. Never have to die. Enoch is one of them. Isn't that crazy?
Why Enoch?
Very good question. It only gives you that to make your answer fun. That's it. That's the whole thing. The verses she read, that's it. There's no other explanation for
Because he
Enoch.
has son?
No, because he walked in close fellowship with God. And if you look at what was happening, the world was building up to this point where evil was getting worse and worse and worse until the days of Noah, when God says enough is enough. Enoch lived in close fellowship with God prior to the worst days. But he lived during the time when the days were getting darker and darker and darker. And people were getting eviler. And at some point, God said, you know what? I don't want you to have to deal with it. You come with me. And that's kind of wild. Like no one else really had that chance except for Elijah. That was it. It's the only two guys.
He never dies, so he's still
Yeah. Yeah, you can keep counting his years, but usually like we throw phrases on there to counter that. We're like walked on the earth or lived on the earth to like
yeah, but he's still
make it so we don't have these infinite lifespan type people.
But he does.
No, he's in heaven.
He never died though.
But he's not here.
But he never died.
I didn't say he died. I said walked on the earth. He's not still walking on the earth. He's gone. He's in heaven.
But he never died.
I didn't. Okay. Next verse. Jediah.
And the earth was corrupted in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way with it. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth.
All right. So the flesh here is going to get, for lack of a better phrase, fleshed out in the next verse. What is he talking about? Well, in some of these instances, he's talking about humanity. In other instances, he's talking about all the creatures too. He's actually going to kill a bunch of the creatures too. But he really outlines the why he would be willing to destroy the other stuff. And it's right down here. He says he's going to destroy them, the people, with the earth. Essentially, he's going to destroy the earth, but that's not the goal. He's going to wipe away the continents and the mountains and the trees and start it over. The animals, start it over. But that's not the goal. That's a consequence of wiping away the people. He's going to wipe away the people, and the earth's going with it. Because the people were corrupt. They were actually corrupting the earth. And that's what God's getting at here. That the earth was theirs to take care of and command, and as the people got evil, they started making the earth bad. They were poisoning the planet just by them being there. Now, I don't know all of their actions. I don't know if we're talking about literal pollution or just a sin problem. It could be both. But in either case, God's looking at the planet going, wow, even the planet is corrupt. That's too much. I need to wipe it clean. I need to start over. Okay. Then we get into the next verse. That was yours, Caleb.
Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you were to make it. The length of the ark 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits.
Sorry, it's like an old-fashioned word for width. Like how wide something is.
Bread.
You like because your hand has
Bread one.
a breadth. That's a breadth from here to here. It's how wide something is. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Its breadth is 8 cubits and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above. And set the door of the ark in its side and make it lower second and third decks.
Okay, so God gives him instructions, but remember this book, not written by Noah, it's written by Moses. So I don't think this is the full instruction list. If God told me do this, I would probably be scratching my head for 100 years and making drawings, and like I still wouldn't have a single piece of wood nailed to another piece of wood. To figure out how to do this would be insane. The odds are God gave Noah better instructions than just that. This is what Moses wrote down. Now Moses and Noah, they never met. Okay, they are hundreds of years apart. So for Moses to write this much down, I think is fine. It gives you the shape of it from the outside. That's what you need to know, the reader. You need to know what it looked like. You don't need to know how to build one. So I'm hoping, I'm betting, Noah got better instructions. Yes.
Me and my parents went to this place. I can't remember where. We were coming back from somewhere. I don't know where. And
Okay.
we went to the Noah's Ark thing.
Oh, cool.
If you were seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was.
I've always wanted to go. It's awesome.
So big.
It's humongous.
Yeah.
So I made a mock-up for you guys so you can see how big we're talking here. Because a cubit is not a measurement you guys are familiar with. That is the builder's arm from elbow to the tip of the middle finger. Yeah.
I have a friend who lives like a picture with me.
Oh, nice. All right, so 300 cubits. That a cubit, if you do the math on the skeletons we find from close to flood times, we're talking like 1.7 feet. So it's more than a foot, but it's not 2 feet. Okay? 1.7 is the rough guess we have. It would basically be Noah's arm though, and so because of the natural variation from, even within the same population of your arm length to my arm length, we don't know for sure how big Noah's arm was. So there's no way to translate perfectly 300 cubits into a real day, what we use today, measurement. You can't do it. You would have to have Noah's arm bone with his fingers and his wrist all attached to know what his cubit was. There's no other way. You can't. So we guess. Okay, we guess 1.7, a nice average number of all the cubits we've dug up. And they changed over time, so we went back as far as we could to find that cubit from that era. 1.7, that's our guess. So this is what it would look like. About 510 feet. And this is up against other boats from ancient times. Now these are not as ancient as Noah's Ark, okay? 1400 AD, that's, just over 600 years ago. This is a Chinese treasure ship, the biggest one in the Zheng He's, well, not just his dynasty, but his treasure ship. He had a fleet of treasure ships. They sailed out, I don't know, 500, 600 times. Different number of ships every time, but this was the master ship. This was the big one, 450 feet. Then you've got the largest known Greek warship, and it started with like before the trireme, what's the 2 rows of oars? Right, in other words, a direme, a trireme, a quinreme, and it just keeps going until eventually there's 18 rows of oars, there's 20 rows of oars. It's ridiculous. The Greeks just kept on building bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the biggest one we have record of how big it was is 420 feet long. And Noah's Ark, if it's 1.7, if that's the right number, then it would be 510 feet long. It's kind of insane. Yeah. Which words? This one?
Yeah.
I'll give it a shot.
I said Tesseract on
Tesla.
I think that's T-Rex. I think that's T-Rex. T-Rex. Like that? Yeah, I don't know. I took Greek when I was a kid. I was in like 7th grade. I don't remember a lot of it. All right, so the point though is, if you check with modern day scholars, they for a long time have said this is not possible. They've said not only is the ark not possible, they said this is not possible and this is not possible. These are all lies. This never existed, this never existed, this never existed. They said if this existed, we should have archaeological evidence of the shipyard where it was built. So even if the ship went down at sea and we never find it, we should find the dry dock where they constructed it, because this isn't that long ago. This one, we don't really know where they built it. We don't have good records for that one. Kind of hard to figure that one out. But funny enough, we found the dry dock. And archaeologically, the dry dock doesn't tell you how big the ship is, right? You could take a jumbo dry dock and build any size ship in it. It doesn't have to be as big as the dry dock. But we found a rudder, an unused rudder, like for a ship. And it was like 11 feet long. Like from front to back, not tall, like long. And if you scale that to the size of rudders on the known ships, the ones we do have good evidence for, it's actually for a ship bigger than this one. So they were like, supposedly, from what we see, they were working on a bigger model than that one. It probably never made it to sea because the rudder was still sitting there. But yeah, so they said we should find evidence. Well, we found that evidence. We actually did. So it starts to look a little better, and then you start to dig up older and older ships, and you find techniques we didn't have when we made the assertion you can't build a ship this big. When we made the assertion, when scientists said you can't build an ark out of wood this size, they were building ships like pirate ships. We were that far back, and scientists were already saying, no, can't do it, can't do it. I mean, and we built some really big ships. Fun little Wikipedia page, list of largest wooden ships. Okay, it's got pictures. You can just go down the list, sort them by size. It's awesome. But then it's also got the reason they're not being sailed today column. Sunk, broke apart, lost at sea, crashed. Just like thing after thing after thing. Almost all of them just sink themselves. All of the biggest wooden ships just sink themselves. And it's purely because of how long they are. On the waves, at any one point, the back of the ship and the front of the ship might not get pushed in the same direction. That's it. That's all it takes. If the back and the front are so far apart, they're going to get hit by different waves. And if the back gets hit this way and the front gets hit this way, or the back rolls this way and the front rolls this way, then the boards come apart. They just lean apart. And they might go back together if you built it well, but the water goes in the meantime. So while they lean apart, water just comes in the ship, and then they lean back together, and then it stops leaking. And you literally have to build the ship with pumps running 24/7 to keep the ship up on the water. Just just because it leans and the water goes in. So people said, you can't do this. But as we keep digging things up archaeologically, we find shipbuilding techniques from these eras that are better techniques than we use to build our pirate ships and our colonial ships and the biggest wooden ships we know about for sure. They had better techniques back then than we have now. Now, the ultimate solve for this is really simple. God said do it, and God knows everything. So either God was being mean to Noah, hey, do something impossible. Or God was going to tell him how to do it. Now, the real out here is the gopher wood. Do you guys know what gopher wood is?
It's like super hot.
What's gopher wood?
Wood.
That's actually our best guess. The root word in the Hebrew for the word gopher, because gopher isn't gopher like that, that kind of gopher. It's a transliteration. In the Hebrew, if you're actually reading Hebrew and you know Hebrew and you're reading it on the page, when you get to that word, it's actually pronounced gopher. That's the Hebrew word. We've just written it with English characters so you guys can read it. It's not the little bucktooth, ground rodent. That's not the word. Likewise, there is no tree known to have ever been called gopher wood. There is no gopher wood tree. It's not a thing. So that word is one of those words. It's literally only used ever in the oldest book in the world one time, and that's it. No one ever used it again in any written records. That's the one. The only, the gopher wood. Like, it doesn't exist anymore. And so it could easily be like a tree that went extinct in the flood, and we just don't actually have it. It could be like the word ply. It could literally be like when I say plywood, that doesn't mean what kind of wood it is. That means what I did to the wood. I put it into plies, sheets, and then put them back together with glue. So it could be that gopher is not a type word like a tree name. It could be a process word like ply. When you get 2-ply toilet paper instead of 1-ply toilet paper, that's 2 put together. It's 2 pieces of toilet paper. That's ply. So like it could be that kind of word. It could mean gopher is the technique that he used to build the boat. It could be an extinct tree. We don't know. We don't know. But we do know how big it probably was. It was probably bloody massive. Look at that thing. This is the church building, by the way. That's the ark by its dimensions. If it is 1.7, feet to the cubit. Bah! Yeah, it's an insane thing. Now I messed it up. I put it here by accident. I should have stuck it up here on the edge of the property. I think roughly, if you put it on the edge of the property and then you walked right in front of the church, by the time you got to the sidewalk, that'd be a perfect on the nose 510 feet. I think that'd just be it.
Dang, that's longer than the church.
It's much longer than the church, about twice as long as the church. It's more than half the width of the church. So like if you cut the church in half and think, oh yeah, there I go, I got the same square footage as the ark. Not quite. It's wider by a good deal than half the church. So cutting the church up and restructuring it wouldn't get you there. Plus, it's taller than the church. Much taller than the church. In fact, it having 3 stories in it is really easy if you look at it compared to a cargo container, like this one right here. This is the kind of thing you see on the back of a semi-truck. We have those out on the edge of the property. That's a cargo container. It's just over 8 feet tall. This is the ark! You could have fit 5 stories on it if you wanted to. It's insane! So yeah, it's really, really big. The church only looks as tall as it is because of the fact that we have all these ramps indoors. It makes us have a false height to start with on the outside. Our floors are up off the ground on the bottom story. And then our space between downstairs and upstairs, like the ceiling down there and the floor up here, is big. There's a lot of space between the ceiling down there and the floor up here. And again, from here to the roof is a lot of space. If you climb up here on a ladder, you could stand right here without hitting the ceiling. There's a whole nother man of height up above the ceiling here before you get to the roof. And then on top of the roof is a ledge. When you're up on the roof to service like the solar panels or whatever, like there's a good amount of roof, like wall that comes up to here. So when you're outside, it's not a 2-story building you're looking at. You're looking at enough height to make 3, maybe even 4 stories. We just do different stuff with that height. We don't put all rooms in it like you would in a house. So yeah, it's only a bit taller than the church, but it's plenty tall for 3 stories. Yeah.
The ark just one big wooden rectangle.
That's a really good question, and a lot of people have wondered about that. Now, this is Google Earth. I can't make anything but one big rectangle. I'm not a 3D modeler. It's not my trade. I'm not good at it. I've tried many times, and I'm always terrible at it. So I did the box. That is nice and easy. It's easy to get the measurements right when you're doing a box. Very easy. So yeah, I don't think it was a box. A lot of people have drawn it as a box because there's no hints given to the shape. In the description, God says He doesn't give, make it curve, make it this way, make it have a prow, make it have. He doesn't give any direction for the shape. It doesn't. That's the beautiful thing, because when you're trying to survive a flood, where do you need to go? Up. You need to go up. So your one requirement, float. That's the only requirement. And then when the flood's over, what's the other requirement? Come down. That's it. As long as it doesn't fly, you've done your job. That's all you needed. If it doesn't have wings, you're done. You've won the day. All right, so big giant box. I don't know. Pretty ship. I don't know. You can fit more stuff in a big giant box. Big giant boxes do fall apart as you go. The curved shape on pirate ships is intentional. It helps it to survive the waves. So that when the wave hits it dead on, it doesn't hit it and push the ship. It hits it and gets spread around the ship. So a big giant box gets hit by a wave, it's like punching a punching bag. The ship just has to take the force of the wave. It doesn't spread the wave out. So a curve would be better. Could have been a giant, oval. Could be an egg shape. It doesn't say, so we don't know. All right, move on to the last few sections here. Your turn.
For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, and which is the breath.
That's the normal one.
Oh,
Just
okay.
like actual stuff coming out your mouth.
Yeah. Okay. Breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you.
Okay. So he says he's going to bring a flood. This is the first Noah's hearing about it, by the way. I know we talked about the flood in advance, but Noah was first told, build a giant boat, then told, because I'm going to flood everything. Does that make sense? First came the boat warning, then the flood warning. All right, so tells him he's going to bring a flood. All flesh in which is the breath of life under heaven. Does anyone get this breath of life under heaven business? What's the breath of life under heaven?
Because if you have living
People living on earth. Good answer. What's the breath of life? Why does it make it people?
oxygen.
Huh? It's made of people because they breathe.
Don't animals breathe?
Yeah.
They can
Aren't-
be
it
in the
doesn't-
water.
Aren't animals alive, Sonia?
Anything that breathes like. that
So check
breathes
this out. This actually
air.
does mean people. You were right with your guess. But the reason is because the phrase breath of life is a phrase referring to having a spirit. It's something he said about Adam in the beginning of the creation record, but didn't say about any of the animals. The animals were alive, but not given spirit. You gonna say something, Sam?
You think there are any stowaways?
It's entirely possible people tried, but remember, you got to set up the story here because there's some facts left out for you from this portion of the narrative. You got to put together the whole book of Genesis to tile this together. Okay. So first off, everyone's evil. Everyone's mean. Okay. Second, it has not rained ever. Everything's being watered by mist every night. It's just crazy fog every night. Collects on all the plants like dew, but to a way bigger scale. That's how everything gets watered so far. There are still rivers from streams, from springs, but that's kind of it. So no rain, okay? And then on top of that, this is the only guy who's nice on the entire planet. So think about in your head, okay, like a place like school where there's a bunch of people and everyone's mean and there's one nice person. What happens? I mean, it doesn't take a big imagination to figure out what would be happening to Noah, the only nice guy on the planet of mean people. And he's building a boat to survive a flood, but it has never rained ever.
You got
What do you? Oh, he figured it out. He's gonna get bullied. No, maybe a stowaway, but a stowaway would infer someone who believed Noah. Does that make sense? Someone who thought Noah was right. So that I'm not saying it's like no one would have ever tried, but it just seems unlikely based on the ecosystem he's in, based on the environment he's in. It doesn't fit with the people he's surrounded by. Top that off with there's one door, only one in the entire boat. It's that crazy tall. They're making it out of trees. There's probably not a lot of trees right next to the ark. like where you could climb the tree and get up on the inside from the top or something. So they probably cut down all the trees. So you can probably see this boat from miles around because there's no more trees left. They've harvested them all. And everyone just kind of hates him. And this goes on for years and years and years, possibly over 100 years while he builds this thing. That's nuts. That is a crazy, crazy thing. And so, no, I don't think there's stowaways. Plus, I think it would be story pertinent if there was. And God says he's only going to let these 8 people survive. And then we hear afterwards that only these 8 people survived. I think since they spent a year on the boat, they would have found the stowaway too. I think they would have come across them. All right, so what we've got is 8 people. You, Noah, your sons, those 3, your wife, and your sons' wives, those other 3. So you've got 1 plus 3 plus 1 plus 3 is 8. 8 people.
Plus
That's
a lot of
it.
animals.
And he says he's going to establish a covenant with him. Does anyone know about this covenant? He says I'm going to establish a covenant. It's like a heartfelt promise, a contract, all rolled into one.
Heaven.
Rainbow. Thank you, sir. Now that is later. You won't get there till like chapter 9. But yeah, he's referring to that in advance. I'm going to make a covenant. So God had this all set up. Okay. Last section actually goes to you, Sam.
I'm sorry about that. I am so sorry. I did not know that.
You move quick on your feet when you want to. That was impressive. Okay, go for it, Sam.
And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort of, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds. Every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind, 2 of every sort shall come in to keep you.
To you.
2. Every sort shall come in to you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's written a little weird, but they're not saying it the way we would say it at all. So up here he says you need to take them, but he never says you need to go hunt them. And then down here he's saying they will come to you. They will come to you to stay alive. So the animals are going to find Noah, and Noah's going to put them on the ark. Noah's job is to get the food for them. God's job is to get the animals to him. So God brings all the animals to Noah. That's why all those classic pictures are there. You guys have seen it since you were tiny. The big wooden boat on a hill, the line of animals snaking up to the little ramp in the side of the boat. There's 2 of every animal side by side. I know that sounds absurd, but if God's the one making the animals do it, I don't know why they wouldn't be in a nice neat little line. Like, isn't that exactly what God would do? He has all power to make the animals do whatever he wants. Yeah, make a little. Heck, maybe they're doing the combat. I don't know. They can do whatever they want. God can do whatever he wants. Noah's job, though, is essentially an impossible seeming job. His job is to gather food for every animal species on the planet. That is an insane job. And it's not like a few days of food. It's like a year of food for every animal on the planet. And then for himself and his family for a year. That's nuts. And he does it. Not to mention the building of the largest wooden boat on record. The largest wooden boat on record. And this is at a time when there's been no floods. Now, there are oceans. There are seas and lakes and things. And so I'm sure boat builders existed. Boats existed. But nothing on this scale. No giant save-the-world ocean liner yet. So Noah is doing this impossible, crazy, ridiculous thing. And then he's asked to go get food, too, for everyone. Another secondary, impossible, crazy, ridiculous thing. And kind of key to the story, it doesn't tell you how he does it. I think this is important because if we look at the story and it explained how to do it, then we would be thinking about, like, maybe I should be a builder like Noah, maybe I should do things like Noah. Maybe there's a perfect way to do it and I need to know that exact way. But it doesn't do that. It doesn't tell you how he does it. It just expects you to believe he did it.
Okay.
That's all you have to say. Okay.
Challenge accepted. But, and this is the big but, like, what if God asked you guys to do something impossible?
I wouldn't do
I'll
it.
be like, how do I do this?
Yeah, I'll do it.
That is always my first reaction. This is my personal problem. I don't say no, God. I don't say I don't want to, God, or God, that's impossible. I say, okay, God, tell me exactly how. Tell me how, and then I'll do it. But he might not. He might just expect you to go. You keep going through Genesis with me. We're going to keep doing this every week. We're going to get to this guy named Abraham. Abraham had such faith, God counted it as righteousness. Now, he wasn't righteous. You can read his story. He's super not righteous. But he was counted as righteous because he has the faith. And his faith was the kind of faith where God says, do something crazy, do something impossible, and then Abraham doesn't say, how? Hand dancers. Tone it back for a second. Just for a second, okay?
I don't get this.
They're bored. They're having fun with their hands. That is it. It's the
I didn't
whole
know I
thing.
could do that.
I just watched that on TikTok. I've never seen anyone do that other than TikTok. I don't know why I have TikTok.
Are you having fun, Seth?
Huh?
I can tell you're having fun. There's some serious joy going on.
I can't even
All right.
do it.
You guys finish this up with me? We're at the end. This is the finish line.
No.
The point. The whole point. You could just leave today knowing how big the ark was if you want. You just go. That's pretty good. That's not that bad. That's, you know, you learned about a big box. That's cool.
That's all I need to do.
That's all you need. You're good. The point, though, is like Abraham, is like Noah, but for you guys. 2 minutes. A little bit longer. This is it. We're wrapping it up. This is the whole point.
Got it beat.
When God gives you something to do, it usually is impossible on your own. It's how he works. He tries to find things for you to do that you can't do if you try them alone. It's intentional. When he gives Noah the job, make a giant, ridiculous boat, stick all the animals in it, the point is that you can't do that. No human being can make a boat and get every animal on the planet to go live in it. You can't do it. Because by the time you go get the tigers, the elephants have run off. You can't do it. There's 8 of you, and there's like, hundreds and thousands of species. Every time you lock one in a cage, you have to leave to go get another one. They break out of the cage again. This is the impossible task. Be a zookeeper with no training. Build the zoo. Feed the animals. No training. And Noah could just say that. God, I don't have any training. God, I'm not ready. God, you're gonna have to give me like an entire encyclopedia of how to take care of these animals. I'm not gonna be able to figure this out. God, I can't do it. That could have been his response, but that's all we get. The only part of the story we get is the finish. The ending to this is Noah did this. That's it. That's the ending. Noah did it. God says, do all the impossible, do the ridiculous, do the things you can't do. No one can do this. And then Noah did it. That's it. That's the ending. And so this is the point. When you guys are asked to do the impossible, when God says, go talk to that person, I don't care if you're shy, do it. And you're like, God, that's impossible. I can't do that. You could just tell him that. And you'd be right. God, I can't do that. You'd be right. You alone, you can't. But he's expecting you to realize that, and then he's hoping you'll realize the next step. That's okay, because he's there to help you. Does that make sense? That's the next step. If you don't make it to that step, then you've actually failed. Realizing you can't do it on your own, that's great. That's a success right there. If Noah tried this on his own, he would have failed. There's no way to go around the entire planet in the time given and get 2 of every animal. By the time you got to the far edge of one side of the continent and got your bears and brought them back, like some of the other animals would just be dead because it took so long. They would just be old, dead animals. Some animals only live like 10 years. Like, there's no way you can do this. But through obedience, just trying, just to see what God's up to, God fills in the gaps. God gets the animals to him. God does the impossible part. And Noah just had to be obedient. Does that make sense? Sonia, what was your hand up for? Why is your hand up?
You waited too long.
Why is your hand up?
Because I was going to say something, but then you said it.
Oh. Okay. Well, that's good.
That was me.
I'm sorry. I was trying to be mean. All right. That's it for today. I love you guys. It's time to get going. Jane started doing that lately. Where we like say something like "I love you," and she's like so buried in what she's doing. She says like, "Thanks." Yeah, I always start on the left.
We still have 19 minutes left.
I know. Do you guys have 19 minutes of attention left?
No.
Because I don't think so. I don't think so. All right, so we're gonna wrap it up here. We're gonna stop with that. I love you guys. No, do not throw a Bible.
No, I'm not doing it.
No,
I said
don't throw Bibles. Throwing Bibles is bad for Bibles. Tears their binding.
Don't throw the Holy Bible.
Have you ever heard Jane sing it? It's the B-I-B-I-B. Sometimes she gets it right. Sometimes she says B-I-B-L-E. But then when she heard B-I-B-I-B pronounced by us, when we said a bibbit, what's a bibbit? She thought it was funny. And so now she does it kind of on purpose, I think. 3-year-olds are fun. Okay. Oh, before we pray, a little moment of joy. Do you want to tell them, Emily?
Having a girl.
Having a girl! Yep. Jane gets a little sister.
She was not that
Her literal response is, but I like boys.
She goes, no.
Yeah, so she gets one whether she likes it or not. That's cool. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for babies. We thank you for your word. We thank you that we get to come together and talk about it. We still have that freedom. And Lord, we just ask that you would help us to cherish what we learned from your word. That we wouldn't forget things like what we learned from Noah. That you can ask us to do impossible things. And to do them, all we have to do is be obedient. We don't have to be capable. We don't have to be able. We don't have to have superpowers. We just have to say yes to you. To walk in the plan you put before us. So help us, Lord, to have the faith for that. We can't do even that part on our own. We need your Holy Spirit to be with us every step of the way. So, Lord, make those things known to us. Help us to know what you're asking and to do it. Give us the wisdom, give us the courage to be like Noah, to step out in faith and do something impossible. Even if it's something small, yet impossible, Lord, just to have the faith to trust you. We ask that in your name, Jesus. Amen. I love you guys. Love you too.
I know, thanks.
I missed you. I really did. I was gone for 2 weeks. I missed you.
I love you.
And they'll be here in 9 days. She'll be here in 9 days.
Give me my phone.
9 days.
Not my hat.
Not my hat. I'm telling you.
Oh, again. Oh,
What?
again.
Yes.
Not my hat.
Oh, yeah.
Get out of here. Get out of here.
Moving.
And half a donut.
Who's playing?
Once they get destroyed, they have nothing.
I'll be
Wait for me, I'm going first. Bye. I have no clue.
No. Okay, how about we do this? Okay. Nate,
Cool hats go first.
be quiet.
Second.
Nate. Okay, no. Stop. Okay. Nate. JR. Abby. Look at Anna. So I just read
Cool hat.
This
Cool
way,
hat.
this way.
my coffee. No. No.
And
JR.
They always sit on the right. Okay, we're ready.
Oh, I love
Oh wow.
Get this out of my face. I got extra.
You know what? I feel pretty bad now.
You really want to get destroyed?
Let me get Nate.
No, you know you not. You that's a lie.
That's not double tap though. It's not double tap.
You
So,
still held on to it. And
Yeah.
hit it.
Yeah.
You still held on to it.
Well, it wasn't double tap though. So no, that's not. That the only way to get a letter by holding the ball is you hit the ball twice. That's double tap.
No, and also guiding it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so that's another way to get a letter to guide it. Yeah, it is.
I've been playing on the computer. I know the rules.
Yeah, but you didn't guide it. You just think that's what you want.
Yeah, but you can't hold on the ball this way.
I'm just saying that. I'm saying
No,
if the
that's-
ball is right here and the ball is right here, if you're inside. Yeah. You have to.
Wow.
Yeah. Stop it.
Why?
Yeah, I.
That almost looked like a fish for him, Oh! I hate some of these buckets because they have
Whoa!
That was not even on kill. And the best part, that can't be off the table because it's lifelong and
I have a C. That's all I have.
Nothing.
That's all I have.
Nothing. Nothing.
Yay! No, it stopped. It stopped. That stopped. Yes. No. Come on. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. Okay.
I could tell.
Hello.
No, everyone stopped. That stopped.
That's all.
Wait. So out on Hannah?
The hand.
No, he's not on Hannah. All right.
I'm not.
Of course you do.
What?
I don't like it.
Oh!
Side shot.
Side shot!
Oh, side shot. Oh.
Yeah, you're after me.
Wait.
Oh.
I'm just gonna keep on tapping.
I forgot you were like, oh, who, what?
Are you guys out or something?
Yeah, there.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I want to play next time.
Oh, watch your fingers.
Your fingers, boy.
Deadpool!
That's the R.
Should have gone for it.
I'm gonna put my hand right
Stop
here.
trying.
Okay.
Should stop. Should stop. Let's stop. How could this happen to me? I'll never stay. Called it. Called it. Called it. Called it.
What'd you call? What did you call?
All he must stay. What can I say?
No!
Double down.
You lied. Don't do it.
Not rocket science.
That's not.
Yeah, that was a side shot.
I don't care. Stop.
Stop. That's all I can.
You.
Stop.
Yes.
And this nearly got put over there. Oh wow, I don't know that much.
Still waiting.
Wait for it, Louis.
Oh!
I
I
cannot
always
even
get him
grab
with the
it.
tap.
See,
Let's go. I got him a letter.
my first letter of that game. You guys have mixed it out.
Thanks. I'm out.
Get out, Jediah.
Yes!
Oh.
Yes!
Who's hat? Nate?
That's Nate's.
Okay, Nate. I'm gonna take this hat. Nate, take this hat. Nate.
That almost stopped.
Nate, I'm gonna take this. Okay, thanks.
I'll take that.
You're out after. You.
Are you finally done with the video?
No.
I'm mad at
Emily, is this broken?
Where is my cup? Where is my cup?
I just need to on the table. I just need to slow down, like, no!
Get him!
No!
Get him! Yes! Come on! Oh! That like disappeared in the blink of an eye. Yeah. Are you guys playing?
She comes on Wednesdays.
I'll go post some. I won.
No, I make release my dad can do us.
I'll post. I go post that one.
Alright.
So it's me,
My name's Cameron.
I said Cameron! I said deal with it!
You said duck.
Lily,
Done, done, goose.
you're done. You're done.
Okay.
Okay, so everyone know who you're after?
Come on,
No, no. Go this way.
Wait. So I'm after Cam.
I get destroyed.
Does this look like a
Okay. Alright, go. Go.
Your body.
Oh, this is like us.
Wait, then that stopped? Okay,
Yeah,
that's
what
stopped.
are
I was just extra measure.
like,
It's not making precaution.
get out. Get out. You
Yeah.
attack me more so hard. Be gone.
Ooh.
Oh my gosh. That hot. That hot. untied my shoe because of that hop.
That's my C. But I got Abby at a R.
Yay, I'm saying. Woo! Gonna ditch my shoe guys.
Caleb. Oh, ready.
That stops. Yeah, man. The ball does stop it. Are you out? I don't know. What? I think I clicked.
Yeah, it sounds like it's
T
R.
U.
C or U D.
You on your dude.
Yeah. You're still in. You're still in.
You got one life. You got one life. Like, no! Side shot.
Side shot.
You stole. One way to get back easily. No, I can't tap it on you. No. Wait. Yes, I can.
Stop it. Stop.
No.
No,
No, it's all right.
why would you do that?
Abby.
Karma.
For you.
That's
Almost a side shot.
side shot.
That was a side shot.
Oh my god.
We can take a shot, but that was a side shot.
Team knockout shot.
I've just had Nick sunglasses. Side shot.
See, hang on it. Side shot it. Did anything. Damn it. Right. Where's my hat? Where did my hat go? Hello, darkness, my old friend. Where did my hat